Dear friends, to all those of having an interest in the future of direct payments, a very warm welcome this morning. My name is Jürgen Tack. I'm the Secretary General of the European Landowners Organization. And let's say we are the ones organizing this meeting, but I have to thank our co-host, Stoyan Chukanov, who's a representative of the House here, and who was able to give us this room to have this meeting this morning. When I wrote my original introduction, I stated after some turbulent years, but in reality, if you are speaking about that CAP, all of the years are turbulent. So I should speak about the history of CAP as being turbulent. But we have seen that in the past couple of years, systematically farmers, land managers have been asked to adapt to new CAP rules at an ever-increasing speed. And nowadays, and it are busy weeks for those involved in at the European level. We had this week the first meeting of the new EBAF, the European Board on Agriculture and Food. Let's say for the first time those 30 organizations which were selected were sitting together under the chairmanship of the new EU Commissioner. I have to say that first meeting was especially an introductory meeting where we made sure that everybody knew around the table who was sitting there. We also learned who was not sitting there. That too was an important aspect. But it shows that with 30 organizations represented over there, out of 190 candidates, that there are still quite a number of organizations not around the table. And I think that's an important task for those around the table to make sure that we make the link with all of those other organizations so that we make sure that there is a good representation of the whole agri-food sector, of civil society, and of the farming community, of course. If you look at the Common Agricultural Policy towards the future, then let's say the stated objective is of course a simpler and a more targeted Common Agricultural Policy, where we should see more of a balance between incentives, investments and regulations. But we all know that is easier said than done, particularly as it has to respect a number of well-known goals to strengthen competitiveness, resilience and the sustainability of the agricultural sector while considering the social impact in rural areas at the same time. Most of the time that makes that it's not going to be a revolution, it's going to be an evolution, and I don't think that is going to be different in the next one. Now the main aim of this meeting is to address some of the ideas on how to potentially reform the Common Agricultural Policy, particularly on direct payments, which remain up to today the most important part of the policy. And in this context, I do think that it's key to have an open dialogue with as well the farming community, with land managers, other actors in the food chain, civil society, and of course policymakers, who in the end will make a decision on the future of those direct payments. We have a number of very interesting people speaking today. We will have a panel in the second part. But it's a pleasure that we were able to have a video message of our new Commissioner, Christoph Hansen, and we will have a look at the message he's conveying to us.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to address your event today. It comes at a very timely moment. Just 2 days ago, I chaired the first meeting of the European Board on Agriculture and Food, of which the European Landowners Organization is one of the 30 member organizations. Your input is important for our work in drawing up the EU vision for agriculture and food, which I plan to present in a few weeks' time. I welcome the ELO's active engagement in working out how to make this vision a reality. Our vision for a competitive, resilient and sustainable agriculture sector will be a roadmap for the future of European farming. The vision starts from a simple question. What does a young farmer need today and also in 2040 to enter, stay and thrive in agriculture? Agriculture needs to remain a profession that attracts young people, where they can earn a decent living and be paid fairly for what they produce. Without creating the right conditions for the future, we risk losing the next generation of farmers. This is why I want to make generational renewal one of the central ideas for the way ahead. Farmers not only need to have enough income to support themselves and their families, they also need to work the land sustainably in a changing climate. This is how they can stay competitive. As you know, competitiveness is a top priority for this Commission, with the Competitiveness Compass presented just last week. Competitiveness includes agriculture too, of course. We need to consider how best to support the sector, making it a priority for farmers to receive a fair share regardless of farm size or region. We must support entrepreneurship in the food value chain because farmers are themselves entrepreneurs and drivers of innovation in the countryside. At the same time, we should invest in research and innovation, correct imbalances in the food chain and address the investment gaps in agriculture. Environmental sustainability is vital. We need a clear compass to make farmers' environmental efforts visible and recognized. Here, agriculture and nature can go hand in hand. Our farmers want to contribute to the fight against climate change. After all, they are the ones who are directly affected by natural catastrophes caused by climate change like droughts and floods. Looking to the future, later this year I will present the new Common Agriculture Policy for after 2027. We want a CAP that works for farming across all member states, so it must retain its objective of public support. We cannot compromise on our food security and food sovereignty. But the new CAP must be better targeted and more effective in facilitating sustainability transitions. And it must be simpler too. Now is the time to act on simplification. Last year, the Commission already reduced administrative burden for farmers, and I commit to continuing this work. Let me now say some words on farmers' income and direct payments, which I am aware you want to hear about. Average farm income in the EU remains low and highly unstable, especially for certain sectors, regions and farm types. Agriculture income per worker averages around 40% lower than average wages in the economy as a whole. In short, our farmers need to get better revenues. This would allow them to make the investments needed to prepare for the future and to make their farms more resilient. They also should not be forced to systematically sell their products below production costs. For farmers to get better revenue from the market, they need to be able to negotiate fair prices. However, many of them struggle with weak negotiating power and lack of market transparency. To remedy this, one of the first steps I took in this mandate was to strengthen the position of farmers in the food value chain and make sure they can receive decent revenues from the market. I proposed amending the Common Market Organization Regulation and creating new rules on cross-border enforcement as part of the Unfair Trading Practices Directive. But clearly, on its own, the market is not enough. We need the CAP to support farmers' income, and this is achieved through several tools such as direct payments, ANC support and market measures. Direct payments still play a key role in supporting and stabilizing agriculture income at farm level, accounting for 23% of farm income in average in 2020. While the redistributive effect introduced with the CAP between 2023 and 2027 enhances distribution fairness in some territories, it is not to the extent that the Commission has consistently proposed over the past reforms. We need appropriate mechanisms to better target support at farmers who need it most. This message was also highlighted by the strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture. In the next months, we will work intensively to design the future model of the direct support for the CAP after 2027. In the process, we will consult the academic community as well as other stakeholders. I look forward to seeing the conclusions of your debate. I hope to discover how you think we can advance towards a more efficient system of direct support. Thank you very much.
To hear Commissioner Hansen, I think even if the sound was on the lower side, that we have heard a number of buzzwords which are coming back in the last couple of weeks: simplification, better revenues for farmers, payments for farmers who need it the most. And I think exactly that last one is something which is many of us will have other interpretation of who are the farmers who need it the most and how we have to organize this. And that's exactly part of the discussion of this morning is if we are looking at direct payments, where should we look at, how should we tackle that, and who are in reality the farmers we should reward with direct payments. Our next speaker is Paulo de Nascimento Cabral, and I hope that my pronunciation is at least coming somewhere in the neighborhood of reality. He's a Portuguese member of the European Parliament. He's a new member of the European Parliament elected in 2024 as part of the European People's Party. But within the EU Parliament, he is a member of the Committee of Agriculture and Rural Development, so it's not by coincidence that he is here. He served also as Chief of Staff to the President of the Government of the Azores between 2020 and 2022, and he was an advisor for Azorean Affairs and Energy at the Permanent Representation of Portugal to the European Union between 2022 and 2024. So he's certainly not new within the Brussels bubble, and he's I would say, an excellent link to what is happening at the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development. But the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Good morning to all. I can add to my experience there that I was a parliamentary assistant also in the European Parliament for almost 10 years. So unfortunately or fortunately, I know how things work. And this and this video from our commissioner that I appreciate a lot, our new commissioner for agriculture, it's symbolic, because when Commission talks about money for agriculture, it starts lowering the voice and very low, so no one can understand the right amount. So thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Jürgen Tag, Secretary General Fellow. It's an honor to be part of this panel. Also to our host, Stoyan Chokhanov, for hosting us, and good morning to all of you. Well, may I react, if I have the time, may I react to some of the words that was referred by the Commissioner. The question of the importance of good income for the farmers, it's crucial, because if not, we cannot attract young people, we cannot have this generation renewal. I'm one of the organizers of the EPP Young Farmers Congress that gathered around 500 young farmers here in Brussels, in the Parliament. So one of the things that they need is to see that the activity has their own attractiveness. If not, if they don't see two things, good remuneration, a good income, and if you don't see the recognition, the social recognition of their work, they will not enter in the agriculture sector. So it's quite important to create this feeling that we need the agriculture, we need the farmers, we need the agriculture to, of course, guarantee our strategic autonomy. And at the same time, I would like also to say to you what I said to Commissioner Hansen in Agri Committee, is that we were talking about the difficulties to get other sources of funding for the CAP. And one of the things that I told him is, go get your share to the security and defense budget, because agriculture is also security and defense. We cannot think of agriculture be a separate sector, because and I use this expression, it doesn't make any sense to have armies that we cannot feed. So we need food. And one of the things, the most important things for me, is guarantee the Europeans have quality and accessible food on the table. If not, we'll create a huge mess, a huge confusion inside the European Union. Other thing that I usually defend, it's that of course we need to create in this reform of the CAP, we need to create the feeling that I think we went too fast, too far. We need to remember us of the founding of the roots of the CAP policy. It's quite important to understand that we need CAP to produce good food at accessible prices. And all the other activities that the farmers place to this society should be remunerated from other sources. And I'm talking about environmental services. One thing is to produce food in a sustainable way. The other thing is to serve or provide services to environment, to society, as they do occupy the territory, and we are always talking about this complementarity with the CAP and cohesion policy. So it's quite important to understand that we need to separate what is sustainable production of food and what is the other services of the farmers that they produce to the society in order to try to achieve a better financial envelope for the CAP. So this is some ideas that I will try to defend in the next reform of CAP, of course, the generation renewal, etc. And why I'm saying that? Because what we are seeing is a constant decreasing of the share of the CAP budget in the overall European Union budget. And this is a reality that came from over 40 years ago. So in the 40 years, we were used to say that the CAP budget is the biggest budget that we have in the European Union. Now it's not true. Cohesion policy is the biggest one, especially in the investments. And we are facing some doubts here in the Parliament, I would say only in the Parliament, of the way we should manage the CAP for the future. If direct payments will be a reality, if it's a reality, in which direction should we go of the direct payments to support the income or to create more burden, more demands on the farmers. So it's quite important, this debate here. I'm looking forward to hear all of you because I want to learn also and not only say my position. One other thing is that I would like to raise, it's the position of the civil society regarding agriculture or agri-food or agri-food products. In 30, 40 years ago, we were used to spend, my fathers and my ancestors used to spend roughly 30% of their budgets on food, try to food, because the food was expensive. And now they don't accept to spend 30%. If they spend 10% of their budget, of their income, it's too much. So they are used to food at lower prices. Good food, quality food at lower prices. And how did you get there? Because of, I may say, support of direct payments also. It's one of the reasons. Because, of course, we have efficiency, we have new techniques, etc. But one of the things that I usually say when they, in my circumscription, they complain about the amount of money that goes to the farmers, what I used to say is this is going to the farmers for you to go to the supermarkets and have accessible food. Not because of the farmers, they are not rich, they are not earning so much money. It's because you want to pay less than €1 for a liter of milk. If not, if he didn't receive any kind of support, maybe the liter of milk will be €2 or €2.50. Are you okay with that? No, I'm not okay. So let's stop talking about the millions that goes for agriculture, because divided for all the farmers, it's not a reality. Even with these conditions, the European Union has lost 37% of its farms. And this is quite challenging. And I would not remind you the average age of our farmers, because in the European Union it's around 58 or something %, And for instance, in Portugal, it's higher, it's around 60. It means that without these good measures or the attractiveness of the sector, we will have a huge problem in 5 or 6 years, because these farmers will retire, and who will replace them? And if we cannot produce food in the European Union, how can we survive? Depending on Russia, we saw in energy that Russia is not a viable partner. They weaponized energy vectors against Europe. Depending on Mercosur right now, well, I will not start the debate about Mercosur. We will have this debate in the near future. I just saw that we are going to have this debate in the next plenary session. Who are going to depend if we not try to look inside of us, inside of the European Union, and try to get this strategic autonomy that is always being said by the Commission and by us also. And one of the things that President von der Leyen just said on the speech of the State of the Union in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, is that no agriculture should sell the products that they produce below the prices of production. So how can we manage that if people are not willing to pay more for what they eat? In my case, let me just finalize with 2 or 3 main ideas regarding the direct payments. Direct payments are quite important in this sense, and have long been the cornerstone of the CAP, because they provide essential income to support farmers and protecting them against market volatility, stabilizing agricultural markets and ensuring a predictable supply of food, promoting diverse farming practices that contribute to rural sustainability, guaranteeing food security by supporting local production. Direct payments reduce reliance on important food, strengthen EU strategic economy, assisting farmers in producing safe, healthy and affordable food for European consumers, and rewarding farmers for delivering public goods not normally compensated by markets, such as environmental protection and landscape preservation. Nonetheless, considering the increasing legislative constraints, decreasing prices and the impact of inflation over the years, many EU farmers remain highly dependent on public support, particularly through direct payments and rural development funds. And we cannot forget that we have a diverse landscape of farmers in the European Union. We cannot speak about one only agriculture in the European Union. We have several. A lot of regions depends directly on agriculture, and agriculture also have a social symbolism, a social impact. It guarantees that our rural areas are occupied, are explored, are maintained. Should this be remunerated, rewarded, or should we just look at the production? This is a huge debate that we are going to have right now in the following months, because we need to define what we want for the future of the European Union. Produce, rural development, what will be our goal? Between 2018 and 2022, the EU average share of direct payments in agricultural factor income was 23%. When accounting all subsidies, including rural development funds, total EU support for agricultural income reached 33%. But countries like Cyprus, Italy, Malta, Netherlands and Spain report lower dependency on direct payments, below 20% of agricultural factor income. But in contrast, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Slovakia have a higher reliance on direct payments, exceeding 40% of agricultural factor income. In Portugal, my country, direct payments, it's not my country, my hometown. Direct payments accounted for 21% of agricultural factor income, while the total EU support reached 39%, highlighting the critical role CAP funding plays in sustaining Portuguese farmers. Furthermore, direct payments are fundamental importance, and I have to say that, for all the regions or more rural regions, but let me stress the outermost regions of the EU, such as Azores and Madeira, where geographical and climatic constraints significantly increase production costs. Programs like POSEIDS, what we have to replace the first pillar, for the former first pillar, the direct payments, provide targeted support to safeguard economic sustainability of agricultural activities in these regions, reinforcing their resilience and long-term viability. So, what are the future scenarios for direct payments? I will end right now. 3 scenarios that I foresee. Enhanced targeting of small and medium-sized farms and rural occupation and generation renewal. I think it's the most important one because we need to guarantee food sovereignty, guarantee occupied of the territory, and also the generation renewal. Continued implementation of coupled support for vulnerable sectors, and I have to say that there is some sectors in my hometown, for instance, like the milk production, they cannot function without any kind of direct payments or direct support because they stabilize the markets, reduce reliance on imports, and preserve key agricultural activities essential for food security. And C, integration of innovation and digitalization incentives. It's quite important. We organized with Confagri, it's responsible for the cooperatives in Portugal, a session in the parliament, and it was very interesting to understand that the digitalization of the agriculture is the future. So it's quite important to have these gains of efficiency, these gains of techniques. But one of the things that was a complaint is that, okay, this is fantastic. But in one conference that I was talking about digitalization, one farmer went to me in Portugal. He said, okay, very good words that you said, but you know, for me to make a phone call, I need to go up a hill to have network. So how can I talk about digitalization in my farm when I just don't have the necessary infrastructures? So we need the agriculture to be complemented with other funds like cohesion funds, rural development funds, regional development funds to create the infrastructures to innovate and to modernize in agriculture in some regions. Although also it's quite important to understand that water is a scarce resource, so we need all the techniques that we can use to do the activity more sustainable, of course, more profitable, more efficient, and to create these conditions for the attractiveness of the sector. In conclusion, and sorry for this long speech, direct payments, I believe, should remain a fundamental pillar of the CAP, playing an essential role in stabilizing farm incomes, ensuring food security, and promoting sustainable agriculture. In 4 points, the EU must ensure that direct payments continue supporting small and medium-sized farms that are the backbone of rural Europe, maintain coupled support for vulnerable sectors, encourage innovation and digitalization, strengthen support, of course, for outermost regions like Azores and Madeira. Agriculture sector is vital to the Union's social, economic, and environmental fabric. A balanced approach to direct payments tailored to regional needs and sectoral challenges will be crucial in ensuring a sustainable, competitive, and resilient future for European farms. Having said that, I don't have dogmas, so I'm here to listen and to see which one is the best way to forward for the future. So thanks a lot, and looking forward to hear the next speakers.
Thank you, Paulo, for to this meeting. I have to say, I wrote down a number of links you made between direct payments and other aspects we see, I would say, on a daily basis. You mentioned food prices, the average age, the variety of food, regeneration, renewal, vulnerable sectors, digitalization, innovation. It's only a part of the elements you mentioned, which are directly linked to those direct payments, but at the same time giving an indication that when you start working on those direct payments, this has to be taken into account, and so that what sometimes looks at a very simple exercise is becoming a very difficult one in a very short time. Our next speaker with a number of introductory remarks is Stoyan Chukhanov. He's a representative on Nature Session here at the European Economic and Social Committee. And so I have to thank him because he's our co-host for this event. He's already a little bit longer within this organization than Paolo is member of the European Parliament. You're working here since 2020. You're a Bulgarian farmer, so you can make absolutely the link with the farming environment. But you also have an engineering background in animal science, which made that you became the president of the Beef Breeders Association of Bulgaria, but currently here in the House and representing and defending the farmers' interest at Net.
Well, it seems it never works from the first time, but that's okay. I hope you can hear me. First of all, welcome, warmly welcome to every one of you to the House of Civil Society, because we, the European Economic and Social Committee, we are the voice of the civil society here. And second, thank you for this partnership, because actually your organization to a certain extent represents me, because I'm a farmer and a landowner and the manager and all this. So it's like a double win situation. Well, I don't want to, let's say, because my colleague said a lot, Paolo said a lot, I don't want to repeat many of the topics that basically we are on the same page. I just wanted to address to you a little bit more from a different perspective, say a couple more words about me, because I'm coming from a very rural area in southeast Bulgaria, really close to Turkish border, from a village that 8 years ago used to have 1,400 citizens, and now we are about 80. And the next village was 1,200, 1,200, and now it's the last grandfather passed away, so now we have 7 grandmothers. So this is the reality of the rural areas in some areas in Europe. So on top of this, I have a mid-sized farm. I have some walnut tree plantation. I have, of course, producing beef, so I have cows, etc. But the last year was really the worst one for my farm, because we've got one of those wildfires. I lost 37 hectares of trees plantation. It's, you know, then in July, that was in July 17. Before this, actually in my farm, they detected brucellosis. So I had to send 143 cows to the slaughterhouse, and that was just in 2024. All right, so then for me as a farmer started the reasonable question, what I'm doing, what's going to be the next step? Because, all right, we are speaking about competitiveness. How competitive I am right now? There is no more trees. I spent more than 15 years in planting all this and water feeding and taking care. And in the moment, because, you know, with the walnut trees, it takes time until really they get in the full production process. So just about to start it, and it's over. So facing, because it was mentioned by Paolo, facing the climate changes, change the mindset. We are no longer competitive. Having a brucellosis, now I have a quarantine, so I cannot sell my cows to the slaughterhouse or the factory. I don't know, in different parts they call different way. But basically, I'm not generating any income right now. And it's going to be for long, because the first thing is to sell the infected animals to the slaughterhouse. The second thing is to take out the bulls from the herd, because this is one of the ways how the infection is transmitted in between the cows. So then that means that I don't know for how long I'm not going to have any cows. So the production process is stopped right now. All right? So what are we doing? Why we speak about, viability, competitiveness, etc., about especially in these areas and especially on the rural areas, when we are facing really the elephant in the room. And it concerns everyone. That was just in Bulgaria. I doubt you heard in the news about our wildfires. Of course, in the news was mostly about Valencia and, of course, Greece, etc., Portugal, etc., but we are all affected. It's not only Stoyan in Bulgaria, no, everyone. And we made a video last year here in the committee, how actually, because we have a group of farmers coming from all the 27 member states, what was my summer? And in Ireland was like unstoppable rain, in Bulgaria was fires, etc., etc. So we are all affected. So that's why what I'm leading now. That's why I think it's crucial, it's very important that when we speak about direct payments, we have to take into the consideration this elephant in this room. And this is really how to help the farmers in the transition. So how to repurpose the direct payments to go and to help the farmers in this transition, because it's not something important on his phone. I think it's the colleague with the light gray jacket. Yeah, don't press the button, That's okay. So that's why I consider Group 3, to which I belong here in the committee, as a think tank. Because we have farmers, of course, but we have also people representing environmental section, we have people representing rural areas and rural development, etc. So in this think tank, we started reflecting, it's not just to defend my position as a farmer, but how are we going to keep going on? What's the future? How are we going to tackle this? Because obviously it's not enough. That's why we came here last year in Brussels with the tractors. No one is happy, Obviously no one is happy, and no one is going to be happy if we keep going to do business as usual and not taking into the consideration how we can eventually change the system. It's not a matter to put more money into the same system. We have to tackle the system in order to have a different result. And that's why, in our opinion, which is the first official European institution opinion about the future of the CAP post-2027, it was voted before the conclusions of the strategic dialogue in January 2024. And I had a chance to meet with the Professor Peter Strohschneider and to discuss about this. So we are very happy to see a big part of our conclusions, from our opinion, 75% of our conclusions are in the strategic dialogue. And I'm very happy to see that the new College of the Commission is taking on board this. And some of our wording was said now by the Commissioner, which is great from the side of the civil society, because we can see some impact of our work that we are doing here. Because our opinion was agreed and was voted on the plenary by all these representatives. So it was sort of small strategic dialogue before the strategic dialogue. And that's why we are calling for repurposing the direct payments in the way to help the more vulnerable, because it was said by Paulo, but yes, 42% of the European farms are less than 2 hectares, which is the one that actually it's about to disappear in the fastest pace. And that's why he mentioned, we lost 38% of the farms, which 38% it's a little abstract as a figure. But when you say that's more than 5 million farms, when you say that it's about 6,400 farms per week, this is another story. Because losing a farm, it's not like losing any other business. And I can tell you this as somebody that lost a lot last year. I'm still off the water, all right, but for how long? So reinforcing the insurance, in face of the climate changes. This is very, very important. How are we going to tackle this? And of course, something that probably is going to be touched in the first panel, but I've been doing almost 15 years sort of regenerative agriculture. That means a pasture-based beef breeding. So yes, I'm selling meat, but it's grass-fed and it's finished, grass finish. So it's totally different. I mean, the proportion in between the omega, you know about that. I don't need to open a new page in our discussion, but really all this counts. All this is important. Yes, I have to admit that on my own land that I own, of course I'm observing all the regulation required by the CAP. But on part of the land that I'm renting, I do not. Because if I'm observing those regulations, I'm not going to be eligible for the direct payments. So, because, you know, the control is coming and saying, oh, you have a trees here. Well, but that's the natural way to have it. Because actually, in the late winter or in the early springs, that's the place where my cows goes to find food. And that's the place that stays the greener for longer. So eliminating the trees from the pastures, it's a huge mistake. But according to the rules, you are not eligible for direct payments. So that's why when I'm saying we have to tackle the system in order really to face the reality, not to focus on just rules that are like a part of the process, but to face and to really focus on the outcome. Because I have a better results with my cows in this way when I'm using not eligible hectares. So I don't know, maybe I'm long, but I can speak about this days and nights, believe me, because this is my life. And that's what we're doing here. We're representing the people that actually they live the real life on the ground, over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Stoyan. This I would say was much more than introductory remarks. I think it was a very personal and a very passionate testimony of a real life farmer linking the daily problems on a farm to a number of demands you have towards policy, and a policy where you are a part of. So that makes that it's a good thing that we can bring things at a very theoretical level. Also have a look at it, how that is actually perceived in the field. So thank you very much for that. The next part of this morning's session, we have two experts, and I've been told by my former university professor always that the definition of an expert, that's an academic which is more than 50 kilometers from home. That's certainly the case for Alan coming from Ireland. But I have to say, we have two experts with a very similar background. Both of them are studying agricultural economics. Both of them are studying agricultural policy. But they have been doing that from a very different perspective. We have on one side, I would say, the most practical academic I know in this field. And on the other side, we have the most academic policymaker in the field I know. That would give an indication that the two visions would be extremely close to each other. I'm not sure whether that is actually the case. That's something we will learn this morning. But to do so, I will give the floor to both of them. And the first one is Alan Matthews. He is a professor emeritus of the European Agriculture Policy in the Department of Economics, the School of Social Sciences and Philosophy at Trinity College in Dublin. His major research interests are agriculture policy analysis, the impact of international trade on developing countries, and computable general equilibrium analysis of trade and agriculture policy reforms. Maybe you have to explain yourself afterwards what that exactly is. You have been working as a consultant to the OECD, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and the UN Industrial Development Organization. And you have been a panel member in a number of WTO dispute settlement procedures. So I think you really have all of the backgrounds we need to have a good discussion on direct payments. The floor is yours, Alan.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Can people hear me? Is that on okay? Yep. Well, first of all, can I just thank Anna and the European Landowners Organization for the invitation to be part of this panel discussion this morning. We've already heard two really interesting introductory speeches. Thanks to both of you for setting the scene. I'm going to talk to the topic, and I thought it useful just to highlight what I see as the budgetary and policy context first, say a little bit about the background to direct payments, and focus in on just two issues. One, the Commissioner has already highlighted, indeed, I think all of the three speakers we've heard so far, whether we should target direct payments to those in need. I'm going to take somewhat of a counter view on this. Direct payments as kind of green payments, and then just a final set of sort of what I've called personal recommendations. And in terms of the context, you can't really discuss agricultural policy without avoiding a discussion on the budget. And there's, of course, huge uncertainty here. We don't know what the size of the overall EU budget is going to be, what the Commission will propose later this year. We don't know what the share of the CAP within that overall budget is going to be. We know that there are many competing priorities. We will have a new competitiveness fund. We need to find funding for defence and security. We need to find funding for migration policy. We need to find money to repay the next generation debt. So there's huge pressures on what we expect to be a somewhat limited budget. It's also possible we may see some reforms in the structure of the budget. If I look at the proposals in von der Leyen's political guidelines, she has argued for moving from a program-based to a policy-based budget. Not quite sure what that might involve for the CAP. There should be a plan for each country linking key reforms with investments targeted to where EU action is most needed, so more of a performance orientation, which I think we have moved to already in the CAP. And then there is this sort of leaked document which suggests that somehow there might be a sort of a single fund, although, to be honest, I don't see really any reference to the CAP in that idea. But a lot of uncertainty clearly about how much money will be available. Looking at what money is available, we have roughly 300 billion for the 5-year current CAP, and that breaks down rather neatly into 1 billion for the basic income support, another 1 billion of Pillar 1 payments, also mainly income support but targeted in different ways, and then a final 1 billion for rural development policies, which of course also has an income support element in terms of the payments to farmers in areas of natural disadvantage. I also want to highlight the implications of the important change to the new governance, the new delivery model in this current CAP. In the past, when we had this sort of compliance basis, it was really important to argue over what the CAP regulations stated, because that set the terms, if you like, that national administrations and that farmers had to follow. The new delivery model, on the other hand, gives much greater flexibility to member states. And I give some examples of the flexibility that's there. You can move funds from one pillar to another. You can indeed substantially increase, for example, your Pillar 1 payments to payments for public goods if you want to. You have the possibility to limit payments to larger beneficiaries. And member states have also considerable flexibility in terms of how they define the conditionality standards that farmers should observe. of course, you can argue that the overall CAP regulation is still important, because one of the arguments that I hear is that member states are unwilling to be as ambitious as they might be in terms of targeting direct payments, because they don't want to put their farmers at a disadvantage relative to farmers in neighbouring EU member states. So there is an argument that we do need to pay attention to how the new regulations shape up. Although I would argue that it's at least as important, if not more important, to actually look at how we achieve a high level of ambition and effectiveness even in the payments that are already made. You can, for example, increase the ring fencing for eco schemes, but if indeed these are simply paying farmers for things that they do already, which is in many member states what has happened, then you're not really getting much additional environmental ambition, if that is the objective of those payments. And I would argue that policy stability is desirable. We've seen a lot of change recently in the CAP, and I would argue much can be achieved by tweaking the instruments and the governance system that was introduced in the last CAP. Turning then to direct payments, I'm going to sort of set the scene with this quotation from the OECD. It's hardly a revolutionary body, and yet it's really quite a scathing criticism. These are not targeted to income. They may have unintended consequences in retaining farmers in uncompetitive activities, stifling innovation, slowing structural and generational change, and weakening resilience. And there are just a huge number of issues that we could discuss around direct payments. I've listed some of them here. One could add enlargement to that list. But I only have limited time, and I'm just going to focus on the first two of these bullet points. So the distributional issue and the debate about how much we should use direct payments to support farmers in the green transition, as opposed to simply income support. Paolo has already highlighted these figures, but I think it's important just to remember how important direct payments are to farmers' incomes. And these are exactly the figures that Paolo has highlighted for the EU on the whole: 23% of agricultural factor income coming from direct payments, 33% from total CAP subsidies. And if you look at the height of the blue bars, you can see those countries where indeed the shares are even higher. What I also want to highlight is the differences across different farming systems. These are the 2022 data. That was actually a record year for farm income, so probably the height of those bars is somewhat lower than we might expect to see. I perhaps should have done a 5-year average as the Commission did in the previous slide. But what I really want to focus on here is the ranking of systems. So we know that the most dependent farming system on direct payments is indeed our dry stock systems, beef and sheep and goats, followed by the mixed farming system, with actually arable farms also quite dependent. And then on the right-hand side, we know, of course, that pig and poultry production, wine and horticulture are relatively little dependent on direct payments. So again, just these are background facts we need to keep in mind when discussing any changes that we might want to make. Now, I do want to talk about the distribution of direct payments, and I want to make just a couple of background points, just to point out that I'm going to draw on a number of different data sets, and it's important to keep in mind that these data sets have different coverage. So we have an agricultural census, the most recent in 2020, which showed that we had 9 million holdings in the European Union. We then have a payments database from DG Agri, which shows that we have 6 million beneficiaries. And then we have a FADN, the Farm Accounting Data Network, which we use to actually get a more granular look at the distribution of payments. And that covers just commercial farms. And there are 3 million holdings that are represented by the sample in that. So you have 9 million holdings, you have 6 million beneficiaries, you have 3 million farms in the Fadden database. So different scope when we're looking at these data. So here we're looking at the agricultural census data and the distribution of farms by holding size. And indeed, it's already been mentioned, whether it's Paolo, I can't remember, that 40% of the holdings we enumerate in the European Union are less than 2 hectares. In fact, 60% are less than 5 hectares. Now, of course, you can get a viable holding on 5 hectares if you are producing very high-value commodities, but it's difficult. And to be honest, I don't see many of those holdings remaining viable into the future when the current generation passes on. It's regrettable, and I completely understand. There was a really terrific article in Science which talked about land abandonment in Bulgaria recently, and it certainly, for those living there, it is a threatening scenario. But as an economist, I have to sort of say, a farm less than 5 hectares, I'm not sure that that's going to be viable, no matter how much direct payments you give to them in the future. On the other side of the diagram, you have your larger holdings, and if you actually just look at it, it's less than 700,000 holdings over 50 hectares, actually manage 2/3 of our land. And that's really important if we're looking at the environmental impacts of land management. You can do a lot just by targeting a relatively small, around about 7-8% of our holdings. You would actually get 2/3 of the land. Interestingly, those larger farms are perhaps less intensive. They only account for half of output. So it's also interesting to look at the distribution actually broken down by economic size units. So that's the size of the farm business. And again, if you look at the column on the left-hand side, the green line there, you can see that 65% of our holdings, 2/3, have an output, not an income, an output less than 8,000 euro per annum. And we usually, as a rule of thumb, you can say income is about 50% of that. So these farms are generating about 4,000 euro of income. 2/3 of our farms. If we look at the other side of the diagram, we can see that actually, again, around 700,000 farms. But when you rank them by the size of their farm business, not by the size of the area, the size of their farm business, they are actually producing 3/4 of our food. 7% of our farms produce 3/4 of our food. And they manage about 60%, again, just over half, 55% of our area. So on those larger farms, and you can see here from the Fadden database, there isn't really an income problem. If you look at the family farm income on those very large farms, there's relatively few of them, but they produce a lot of food. It's again, remember 2022 was a record year for farm income, but family farm income, if you just remove the agricultural workers, was 190,000. That's an extremely high figure, but even for the next size class, it was almost 70,000 euro as an EU average. So if you look at the smaller size classes in economic size units, you can see, of course, that there is an income problem. So we have this paradox that a small group of farms produce most of our food, and they do it competitively and economically. If you look at the cost of production, prices are covering their cost of production, but the majority of our holdings have an income problem. So how do we address that using with farm incomes, with direct payments? This is the famous Lorenz curve. You're all familiar with this, the 80-20. It goes way back to Ray McSherry's time when he was Commissioner of Agriculture in the 1990s. The figures are a bit slow in coming. The latest data we have from DG Agri actually only refer to the claim year of 2021, the financial year of 2022, so we're not taking into account the changes that were implemented with the redistributive payment in 2023. So you can see that there has been slight improvement in the distribution of payments, but even with the orange line, it actually exactly passes through the 2080 point. So we do observe most of the payments going to those larger farms that I argue actually do not need them in terms of income support. Having said that, most CAP subsidies indeed go to larger farms, but they actually contribute most to the smaller farms. That's something that's often not recognized. If you look at the very small holdings, in terms of direct payments, and again, these data from 2022, so they probably flatter the picture a little bit, but around 45% of the income of those small farms, the smallest farms, again in economic size, comes from direct payments. If you include all subsidies, it's 60%. 60%. So where do you want to go? Do you want to make that 100%? As compared to the larger farms, which are much less dependent on direct payments. So now we see, and the Commissioner again repeated it in his address to us this morning, we see in the strategic dialogue, we see in the mission letter, we must ensure that the Common Agricultural Policy is fit for purpose in order to provide targeted support to farmers who need it most, notably small-scale farmers. So there's a kind of a assumption here that if you are small in scale, you need income support. And I'm going to challenge that in the next slide. Of course, promoting positive environmental and social outcomes through rewards and incentives for ecosystem services. So far, I've simply, if you like, been the scientist. I've presented the data. I'm now entering the area of being more of an advocate. I'm very aware that this involves value judgment, so I've entitled this slide, these are just my personal reflections. So I would argue that we do need to proceed with capping. So if targeting payments on farms in need it justifies capping, then I would be all in favour of that. But I would point out that given that these larger farms manage most of our land, then of course they should and must remain eligible for payments that would support improved and more sustainable land management. I think Tassos is going to talk about soil in just a moment. But if that should mean that we should take the money from those large farms and simply add it to the payments that smaller farmers would get, I simply think that's not a good idea. The argument would be, and I think even we heard this morning, that this is a way in which we will slow down the exodus of smaller farms. As I say, I'm not sure how much additional payment you give to those 60% of farms that have less than €8,000 of output. It's not going to encourage new, younger people who have many other opportunities in terms of earning income. We also know from the academic literature that the payments per job saved, if you actually try to look at what has been the impact of payments to date in terms of slowing down outmigration, the costs are enormous. Even up to one econometric study, up to €300,000 per job saved annually. So it's not a good return on investment, and particularly when we look at the demographic challenges that face us in Europe, we're entering into decades where we're going to face labour shortages. And in that context, I really raise the question, does it make sense to actually try to pay people to remain in low productivity occupations? Now, to say that we shouldn't support rural areas, that's a different debate. I would argue there's many other ways we can support rural areas, but in terms of actually maintaining these 2-hectare farms is, in my view, doesn't make much sense. I would also argue anyway that small farm size is not a good indicator of need. In Ireland, most of our small farms are part-time farms. It's very easy to combine dry stock farming with an off-farm job, and most of our smaller farmers do that. So if your local vet, your local police officer, your local teacher is also running a holding, absolutely nothing against that, but all I'm saying is that doesn't indicate that person has an income problem. And where there is an income problem, and we do have rural poverty and poverty amongst farmers, of course we do, my view that using agricultural policy to try to address that problem simply doesn't make sense. Because the strategic dialogue says, okay, we're going to set up an expert group to look at how we can define income. But the European Union is never going to get access to the kind of income data that national authorities have through their tax systems, through their social welfare systems. That is never going to become available to DG Agri. Just give up that hope. These things are best addressed through national policies. We have some excellent schemes in Ireland, for example, if anybody wants to look at them, the Rural Social Scheme, the Farm Assist Scheme. These are means-tested schemes, but they do provide targeted income support to farmers who are in need. And that's how we need to address that problem, not by tweaking the Common Agricultural Policy. Let me move to the other topic that I want to briefly address, which is using direct payments to support the green transition. And again, just to remind you, everybody here is familiar with the innovations in the current CAP. We ring-fenced minimum spending on eco schemes, of course, also the agri-environment schemes in Pillar 2, but here we're talking about direct payments. We strengthened conditionality, and we also had this climate mainstreaming target. Of course, all of that in the context of a budget which was reduced, certainly in real terms. Again, just to remind you, everybody is aware of the way eco schemes work, so I'm not going to go into the details here. Just to recall on enhanced conditionality, indeed there was greater ambition in the CAP regulation, but of course we've seen a significant rolling back of that higher ambition in the last 3 years through a series of measures, variously justified, initially on food security grounds in the immediate aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, subsequently because of a fall in the value of cereals production in 2023, and then the simplification regulation justified as reducing the administrative burden in 2024. It's interesting, actually, not all member states have made use of all of the exemptions, which suggests that there has been, if you like, some recognition that, at a national level, there are positive benefits from asking farmers to observe these conditions. But indeed, the most significant one, which is the GAIAC 8, which was the requirement for arable farmers to set aside a minimum of 4% of their land for non-productive purposes, for supporting nature and biodiversity. Of course, that has now been made a voluntary eco scheme on the principle that farmers should be rewarded for undertaking this action rather than being made a condition of receiving the payments. So, again, that's, if you like, the background. My own sort of personal views is that, of course, we do need to continue, and I also read the political guidelines of von der Leyen and her mission letters to all of the commissioners as recognizing that we do need to maintain the momentum to try to ensure a more sustainable agriculture, a more climate-friendly, in line with planetary boundaries. We cannot simply give up on that. We could, of course, increase further the ring fencing in Pillars 1 and indeed 2, if that indeed would help to ensure a level playing field for member states that might want to go further but feel they don't want to disadvantage their own farmers. I do raise the question whether it makes sense to maintain this distinction between eco schemes in Pillar 1 and agri-environment schemes in Pillar 2. Both are targeting exactly the same objectives. It seems to me that there would be benefits in terms of simplification, and there would also be, I think, greater environmental integrity. Of course, if you do restrict the coverage of direct payments, then you also need to bear in mind that the conditionality is going to lose some of its teeth, and you need to think of ways of ensuring that some of the benefits of conditionality are maintained on those farmers that might no longer receive income support through that way. So this is my final slide, and again, just to emphasize, these are sort of very personal recommendations. Again, just to emphasize that I feel much can be done within the context of the new delivery model. We don't need to rewrite the CAP in the next reform. I would encourage capping of payments at a much lower limit. I think my figures demonstrate that those larger farms don't require income support as such. They do require support for the green transition. So my argument is I wouldn't distribute the supports to so-called farmers in need. I'm not sure we can define those easily, but I would use those funds to help to support farmers in the green transition. Anyway, some funds, as I say, will be needed to maintain Gaia practices, given that conditionality would not be as effective in that scenario that I'm envisaging. If indeed additional CAP funds become available, I would support the recommendation in the Strategic Dialogue for an Agricultural Just Transition Fund. We could, of course, also encourage as much national and private funding for the green transition as possible. But I would again emphasize my final point that greater effectiveness of direct payments in future depends more on the way that member states design and implement their strategic plans rather than on changes at the EU level. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Alan. As I said, two people with a similar background but at the same time coming from another perspective. I will switch immediately to Tassos Aniotis. Tassos is recently retired after a 33 years career at the European Commission as Director of Strategies, Simplification and Policy Analysis within the Director General for Agriculture of the Commission. Tassos is now a Sustainable Productivity Advisor for the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, but he's also a Senior Guest Research Scholar at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. If I would go through all of your CV, Tassos, we would not make the end of the meeting, so I'm going to give the floor immediately to hear your vision on the future on direct payments.
Thank you. Thank you, Jürgen. I also like to thank ELO and the co-host for allowing me actually to be back in a room that I know pretty well. I come differently. It's almost 2.5, almost 3 years that I retired. No, I will not start crying. The reason I mention that is because some of you in the audience might tell me, that's not what you told us in your previous shoes. And as you have heard, I didn't retire as a director with the full title. The simplification had dropped. So that is indicative of the things that haven't changed. One is that we still talk about simplification of the common agricultural policy. The other is we still talk about the Pareto principle of 80-20 that you can find everywhere, except in this room that 100% of the people are awake. Everywhere else, 80% and 20%. These things don't seem to go away. But what I'm going to focus today is on things that, in my view, need to change and adapt. And while on my right, your left, I have somebody that has similar background with me, and on my other side, I have similar, that we made the same choice of colors this morning. What I'm going to say is going to be different from both of them in certain respects, and I think that's good for the debate and the discussion that we need to have. I knew that I was going to miss the animation when I sent this morning, the correct PowerPoint, but what I'm bringing here is two different approaches of addressing the issue I want to address. On the left-hand side, you have something very recent. I think it was only last week that INRA IDRI presented the study on the next reform of the CAP and the variables in the equation in the European Parliament. I pick up this graph and I put in red circles two areas that clearly identify the difference in my approach with this approach. You have on top environment protection, protection, and in the bottom production capacity. So you have a distinction from the beginning between the economic and the environmental dimension of agriculture. And all the scenarios you are going to do afterwards, however good they are done, and whatever models that use, the same models that we use in the research project that I'm also in both in Lamasus and Brightspace, you're going to get something very wrong. And what you're going to get something very wrong has been, in my view, for years. And, you know, Rudy, as a colleague, already laughs. They did two sketches for me, one in an agri part and the one on my retirement with Tasso's obsession with jointness. I've been saying that for quite many years. This, you cannot separate the economic and the environmental dimension of agricultural production without paying a significant price in the policy design. On the right-hand side, what you see is a graph I presented, that you see, it's slide 23, in January of 2017, when we introduced the Inception Impact Assessment at the Regulatory Scrutiny Board. The same presentation was made 1 week later at the Chamber 1 of the European Court of Auditors, who spent a full day in my directorate, despite claiming afterwards that we never did any analysis for the support. And what I want to focus is the accent that we have put on economy and environment and the type of scenarios we were running, either too much on the economic side and liberalization, too much on the small is beautiful side, and the focus in this ellipse of trying to combine economic and green measures and weighing differently the outcome. So what I'm going to expand on this and go much further than we did at the time, because what I want to focus on is the jointness of the economic and the environmental output, which in my view have to be done together. The focus on the sustainability, the sustainable productivity. I've written already some years ago about the polarization on the debate. It was a time where focusing on climate action and environment was a la mode, and we tended to forget completely food security. We have gone the other extreme right now. Food security has become the pretext to put a brake on environmental dimension. I claim that we need both. Both climate change and food security are global problems that require global solutions, and we should take, as the European Union, the lead in both by bringing them together. And we mentioned the word simplification. We have to see how practically we do it by enhancing policy performance. One of the reasons that the name simplification dropped from my directorate is very soon we discovered that there is a certain logic of simplification counting the number of articles you have in legislation, and how many articles you have. It does not only depend on the proposals made by the Commission, it also to a very large extent depends by the co-decision process and what comes out in this process by the additions and the modifications from the Council and especially the European Parliament. So, three broad things I want to cover. The big picture, and it's going to be much bigger than what Alan said, because we knew we will cover similar things and we didn't want to repeat each other. Some focus on the CAP and some focus on the ideas. Now, the markets were changing before Mr. Trump came about. First of all, they were changing in terms of the production landscape. That's straight from the OECD FAO. We did in the forum also a workshop about where markets are going. Strong growth in fuel and feed, lower growth in food, stagnation in fiber production. What is very important is livestock and feed is driven by income growth. Population growth drives wheat and rise, and that also points where the potential problems of food security are going to be. On the consumption landscape, Europe and the OECD do not really matter much. Asia and Africa are the big players. And on the trade landscape, we had global tensions that we saw very clearly with the Russian invasion in Ukraine and its impact, especially on grains, but we've seen it also in other parts of the world. My feeling has been that we have the tendency to underestimate food security risks and the role of trade. And we have the tendency of doing it with something that, in my view, comes out as arrogant. We don't have a food security problem in Europe, although we have seen we have a food affordability with food inflation. Food security is not a regional problem, it's a global problem. If you have it in Africa, you're going to feel it in Europe and everywhere, through prices and through people moving where food is produced. And I mentioned about the need to start treating climate change action and food security as complements and not pit one against the other. Now, this has led us to confront the CAP with untested waters. The first one is food inflation. Food inflation turned into a global problem that was everywhere underestimated. And I know very well, because with John Buffett from the World Bank, that we have been working on price developments for the last 15 years or so, when he tried to put the problem in the commodity report of the World Bank, and he's the expert on that, it was not considered serious. I'm not going to go into details. There are in an article that I put in the presentation we did for the forum. What is very important is that the focus has been on core inflation, which excludes energy and food. And the biggest problem was in energy and food, especially food, exactly because of what you said. We took for granted that the cost of food in our expenditure had gone down. Well, it happened exactly the opposite. And what happened also, it distorted enormously the price transmission signals throughout the food chain. The energy price uncertainty, I don't need to talk much about it, just to focus on the natural gas, which price is 4 times higher in Europe than in the US. You produce nitrogen fertilizer, you use 70% of natural gas. You can imagine how much cheaper it is to produce it in the US than in Europe. And on the geostrategic tensions, I just mentioned them before. Maybe I put 3 graphs out of many that exist, just to identify that. One, instead of putting the graph I always do with the price developments, I just summarized price developments in food, fertilizers, energy, and metals and minerals, both in real terms and in nominal terms. As you can see at the footnote, I decided to add the nominal terms afterwards and forgot to change the source, the comment in the source. What you see very clearly is food, which here is agricultural, the World Bank index, minus tobacco, rubber, and cotton, so minus the industrial agricultural commodities, has gone up by 24% in real terms in the last 40 years. Fertilizers by 81%, energy 46%, metals and minerals, which is a reflection of the economic cycle, by 96%. It's a textbook definition of the deterioration of the terms of trade for agriculture. Agricultural prices do not have their long-term downward trend. They're going up, and that's different than what we have seen for decades and decades. But everything else is going up much more than agricultural prices. And that squeezes a lot the capacity of agriculture to be competitive. That doesn't mean that we should start crying about that, or we should block our frontier with the illusion that this is going to solve the problem. The solution to the problem is productivity. But a productivity that does not repeat the mistake of the last 40 or 50 years of being at the cost of the environment, but productivity that integrates these necessary technologies and practices that reduce the environmental footprint. It is difficult, but it is happening on the ground in many areas, especially in agriculture. What is not happening is communicate the good examples and making something out of it. This is the food inflation path. I mean, the reason I'm putting this question, and any of you that are from the food chain, especially the downstream part of the food chain, we need an explanation. We have had commodity booms and busts before. We've had 3 in this century, including the last one, and we had 1 in the mid-90s. We've never had the explosion of food inflation we have now. And why is this important? Because food inflation can go to 0. It's the annual rate of change with respect to last year. But the level of prices will stay so high that it will make much more difficult for consumers to afford what they were affording before. And that has major policy implications in terms of the green transition. And finally, on this one, there are many things in this. Wheat is food security by definition, if you want. On the left-hand side, where you have the so-called traditional exporters and what they're doing every 20 years. On the right-hand side, the light blue that is jumping up is Russia feeding the world and expected to feed even more the world in the future. The price that Ukraine paid because of the invasion, and that's with an expectation that the war is over and things will go to normal. That's the FAO-OECD scenario, and what is happening in Africa and the rest of Asia. I've written about that also, that I don't believe that the expectations of OECD and FAO about what the traditional exporters are going to do make sense. The EU, the agri outlook doesn't have an increase in exports. The US outlook doesn't make sense. The Americans have been losing export share, which means that the situation will probably turn worse than what you see right now. So, have we adapted the policy debate in what is happening in the world? On productivity, on science, and on trade, I think there are many things that we have to do in Europe that we're not doing. The first thing that we have to settle is productivity and productivism are 2 things apart. You can increase productivity by reducing the environmental output. The real question we have to ask ourselves, at global level, do we need to produce more with less? And if the answer is yes, and I think the answer has to be yes if we look at the numbers, then how we do it and what is the role of the European Union? And the role of the European Union is one where science should come in and trade should come in. On science, we used to have a monopoly in treating human and animal health differently than plant health with biotech. Now, especially if Robert Kennedy becomes what he's going to become, we're going to have a global, on the other side of the Atlantic, a problem with the treatment of science. But we need to address very soon issues that relate to the manner by which Nobel-winning technologies are fast adapted in the European Union instead of debating for years what we're going to do with them. And when it comes to trade, here we do have a very serious problem. I mean, Trump opened all fronts of what used to be the foundation of global rules, whether it is on borders, whether it is on science, whether it is on trade. How we're going to adapt and adjust to that, it's for others to determine and for us all to think globally, but one of the first implications you see, it's not only about tariffs that he's talking about, it's also cutting down food aid, USAID. So there is, you have the link of trade complementing actions that address food security in different ways. So I covered a lot of space in the global picture, and here I come to what for me is a real problem, especially when you look at the discussion about competitiveness. It's good that we discovered that we have a problem of competitiveness and we have a problem and need for productivity. Where the heck is the EU food system in all this? Why do we keep going in a European self-flagellation on things that we should be proud about what we're doing. The fact that we have problems in the food system does not mean that it is broken. When I finished with Fischler's cabinet before starting my post in Agri, the New Zealanders had invited me for 1 week, and I went. That's a government invitation to all the places they wanted to take you. You go into one of the biggest factories of Fonterra, and what are they showing you? This is European technology. This is European machinery. This is European machinery. And we claim that in areas that we are advanced, we don't innovate in Europe. You look at Earth observation, we're #1 in the world. Everybody downloads for free what the European satellites produce. And we don't even know what to do with them except to do controls. I think there is a major issue on the performance of the CAP. I've put and updated all the graphs that I have done when I was even in the Commission. I want to come back to the point you raised about the OECD. I mean, the OECD should have known better that we never introduced direct payments as income support. Especially, I mean, because I stuck my neck out for what was introduced in the direct payments. I wrote a relevant part of the communication there. And it had to do with market orientation, WTO, and simplification. And what it was doing is compensating partially the drop in support prices, so farmers should go in the market and find out where their income should come. And what did farmers do? Exactly this. And that's how we turned from a net importer into the largest exporter of agricultural commodities with value added. And what OECD should do is take out all the reforms that we have done in the CAP, and if you find the PSC moving at all, let me know, because nobody else has done anything. So that's why I keep arguing that we have put the CAP between a rock and a hard place, because we always have the tendency to put too much focus on the negative sides, and there are negative sides, but forget completely what is working well. It's like going to a student that has 16 or 17, and instead of telling him, let's work together to move towards 20, you start telling him, you're incompetent, you failed, you haven't made your grades. And you don't get people on board on that. So I'm not going to focus most on that because Alan mentioned some of the issues that we're going to discuss. I will go to the last questions. I agree with Alan. Do we want to stop structural change in agriculture? I know that I become unpopular when I say that numbers today are less than what they were 10 years back and more than what they're going to be 10 years from now. The important thing is not the number of farmers. It's what happens in rural areas. It's the point you raised about the need to put internet. I mean, you ask younger farmers that have moved. I still remember in the demonstrations, a friend's young farmer that she got the job from her father. She said, I love what I'm doing, but my question is, the school for my kids, the hospital nearby. So it is the rural dimension that we need to focus, and the CAP cannot cover this. Other type of policies have to do. There is a lot of discussion about whether area, and the focus on area is a big problem. Well, you have 3 factors of production. You have land, you have capital. I haven't heard anybody saying that we need to base payments on capital, and you have labor. And try to focus payments on labor. And good luck on deciding how many hours, who, the family, the relatives, the type of production. For good or for bad, and when we talk about policy, we talk about second-best solutions, area is the best thing that we have available. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't actually change completely the focus on conditionality and what we do with that. Here, there are some questions I'm only put. What's next with the suspended step of the farm to fork? I haven't even seen the term mentioned, but there's still a big question mark about the fork side of the farm to fork and what consumers are going to do, and are they adapting, especially in the current price level, their patterns. So what are the long-term price development prospects? What will do with energy transition? What happens in the global realignment of forces, alliances, and animosities that we never thought that would exist? And then how do we adapt our narrative to what is actually happening? Our narrative started with the Paris Agreement. But if you look at the basic assumptions we made in the Paris Agreement, everything turned much more difficult, and we have actually blown out of any proportion the targets we have set past time in many areas, in my view, without any serious analysis. So let me come now to the topic of what we had. What do we do with direct payments? First question, and we have to be clear. Do away with them or not? And there has to be a clear yes or not in the policy debate. If we want to cover the cost of production and nobody should produce below the cost of production, tell me please, which cost of production are we talking about? Is it the average or the highest one? And good luck to our competitiveness and good luck to the budget, because there is no way of controlling this. We've tried these things in the past and they failed miserably. Is it going to be the counter-cyclical support that some want to imitate from the Americans? But the Americans don't have a limitation in their budget. You can have a legislation, and if the Congressional Budget Office baseline does not come out to be true, Congress is obliged to provide the additional funds, which becomes a debt. And what happens is when prices went very low, their budget almost broke their limit at the WTO. Now that prices were very high, they didn't really pay much, but they didn't cover the cost of production, because at the same time it's not only the output but the input prices that went up. So we have to be clear about that. And my point is from the beginning very clear, despite the effort of Alan to put me into the public money for public goods camp. I'm not this. I believe that we need to focus on public money both for public and private goods, because there is a major failure of markets, not only in the delivery of environmental goods, they don't pay for the environment, and we know that, but in what is happening throughout the food chain and in price transmission. So there is a need to put these things together, and how exactly to do it is something that requires that we admit that farming activity generates outputs in an inseparable way. By the way, OECD, it's not only my obsession, OECD did already something in 2008 about these areas. And the third one is how gradual should the path of adjusting and abolishing direct payments should be. For good or for bad, land is the asset value of the farmer. And if you play with direct payments, you play with asset values. The reason we introduced direct payments in a historical model with Fischler was not because we thought this should apply forever, but because we wanted to be neutral on the impact of land prices, because we said if land prices change because of market developments, this is market orientation, they're linked to prices. If they're driven by urbanization, it's not the cap that has the control of that. The cap has an influence when it comes to the link of the overall level of support, which was already capitalized in land prices previously, and let's be neutral for the transition, but not forever. And that's where I think, before seeing what we do in the future, we need to see some of the strengths and the weaknesses of the payments we have, because all the habits die hard because there are some strengths. Decoupled payments provided a valuable and proven income safety net. And that, I think we all agree. They also establish a solid administrative basis. You know what you have at hand. So whatever changes you have to do, even less, you can make adjustment to that. They're linked, and they linked also support and economic criteria to broader food safety initially and environmental dimensions. Coupled payments also support a few sectors that need it. In our analysis, and I strongly believe it's only for me, it's only the extensive livestock sector that needs it. There are some regional specificities. And agri-environmental payments target support. It's a targeted support par excellence. They reflect the very diversified nature of agriculture, so you don't have the one-size-fits-all approach, and they promote innovative and bottom-up approaches. But they also come with some weaknesses. The biggest weakness of the coupled payments is redistribution. Red tape has become also an issue, but they lack any reference. It has become an accounting exercise with too much flexibility to member states. Coupled payments have the weakness of hampering structural adjustment and sometimes competing with agri-environmental measures for the same needs. And there are weaknesses to the agri-environmental payments. I don't know if anybody in the room agrees with me, but when you look at the requirement for agri-environmental measures, they have to cover income foregone or cost incurred. But the way we have designed them, we do it at the highest marginal cost, which means that you overcompensate everybody else. The Americans do the average cost. They still overcompensate a significant part. And sometimes the criteria are based on experimental results that apply to everybody, while we know that this is not the case. And they also have an administrative burden, because you have to be a bigger farm to be able to fill all the necessary paperwork, as we see when we look at the distributional impacts. So that's the option that I suggested. First of all, put the horse in front of the cart and start focusing more on adaptation than mitigation, because you don't get people on board when you tell them that there are going to be more fires and floods in 2050. You get them on board when they come to you and say, if there is a next fire next year, what we do? Prioritize soil, because if you do good things for soil, water, emissions, air, and biodiversity gain. If you focus on the others, you don't necessarily have a global benefit. So support should be based, in my view, trying to improve soil health. By the way, I'm an economist by training. This is the stuff. I don't have any vested interest in soil. This is the stuff that I learned with all the years of experience and also looking at the research projects that are going on. Now, we have to cover all agricultural area with payments that are conditioned on the improvement of soil health. We should use available data, and there is available data. Soil maps exist, a local survey exists, to define regions based on agronomic criteria. These regions exist. In my view, we need to redistribute all area payments, and that we tried 3 times in previous impact assessments and we failed, based on the opportunity cost of land and labor. There is a very interesting graph that Eurostat put last week with the very different distribution of rental rates or the price of land in member states. Do wages and see whether the redistribution of support should take that into account or not. I'm not very optimistic that member states will do it, but anyway, from an economic point of view, it makes sense. And then, and that's a big thing that needs political understanding of what works and what doesn't. You cannot just go to a farmer year after year and say, I'm going to measure your performance annually on soil. It doesn't make sense, because soil improvement happens over longer periods of time. But you have to find ways of benchmarking this improvement. So that's my last slide. What do you do with such an option? First of all, if you merge all direct payments into one multi-annual scheme with a common conditionality on soil, all means the annual direct payments the annual eco schemes and the multi-annual agro-environmental schemes that around land focus on the environmental delivery. And that is a repurposing of support on measurable indicators that reflect real farm conditions. And you don't need 1,000 indicators. You need a few indicators around soil organic matter, nitrogen in the soil, and 2 or 3 others. And that will do the job. What do you do with other indicators? You still keep monitoring, but they're not the ones that will determine conditionality. So all the challenges and the questions that they're going to ask, how you measure this, how you measure that, are questions that are there right now with agro-environmental schemes, with carbon farming, with private initiatives. How do you measure soil performance in these schemes? The same way that you will measure it with a public scheme that at least will have legislation that you know that it's harmonized. It potentially helps on carbon-linked policy measures. We talk about taxes, tariffs, incentives, and everybody defines in their own way what this price should be. And it also does something in the most valuable farm asset, because for a change, the interest of the landowner and the land tenant should be the same. Because the land tenant wants to maximize soil and land for the period of the rental agreement, which is not a long term. Well, now, if performance is based on the long term, what you have to do is both of them have to look to the overall improvement. And you can make ways whereby whether you get more or less after a 7-year period determines of performance with a wide range. I mean, you can take the upper third and lower third below the average for people to know more or less they're going to get what they got before, and the ones above will get a premium. And by the way, everybody has an interest not to cheat, because you don't know what the others are going to do in terms of the soil performance. So you have an incentive to continue improving your soil health, and exactly because it's based on agronomic zones with similar characteristics, if all do bad because of some reason that is explainable, nobody will pay the price. Now, what could go wrong? First of all, there are clear vested interests in having 2 pillars and every pillar focusing more on what they have. There is this bureaucratic inertia. I mean, I don't know how many times I have heard that this is not possible on things that we knew that the data was available, and especially with a lot of research and the soil mission, there is more and more data becoming available. And finally, and for me that's a very big risk, is the irresistible charm of an endless objectives and indicators. Everyone, if you go into any group, will come not with 1 but 3 or 4 indicators. And very few people will ask the question, where are we going to get the data to do that? So what I'm focusing on is on data that is already there. And that doesn't exclude people that want to go above, but at least I'm trying to set a minimum that would apply to all. So I think I threw a lot of fireworks around to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tassos. As you have been showing a lot, I hope you didn't hit anybody on the other side. While I do have a number of questions also for our 2 experts, I will refrain a little bit, also looking at our timing, and immediately step into the panel discussion. I will ask each of the panelists to make sure that their responses are short, so that we can have a couple of questions, and if possible, I also would like to come back to the room if there would be questions over there. With the panel, we are adding 3 people. First of all, Megan Sapp, Advocacy and External Relations Director of EARA, which is the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture. And I'm very grateful, Megan, you're here, because you're on a European tour. We're doing Brussels this week, and we were together at an event at the European Parliament yesterday evening, which was excellently organized and which we gave a very nice overview of what regenerative agriculture could mean for farming in Europe. The second one is Rudolf Mögele. He's an honorary professor of the University of Würzburg, but I have to mention that previously he was a Deputy Director General at the European Commission, DG Agri and Rural Development, and he was responsible for, if I'm not wrong, 3 directorates legal affairs, audit, and assurance and markets. So quite a big portfolio. And our third additional panelist is Theo Paquet. He's a senior policy officer for agriculture at the European Environment Bureau. I will come back immediately to the three of you. I would say you have a short time shortly introducing your organization, and let's say, and to give a first reaction of what you have heard, and how you look as an organization to the future of direct payments. Let's try to do that in a 3 to 5 minutes framework each, so that we can indeed go to a number of questions afterwards. Thanks. And Megan, I will start with you.
Thank you. I do love a ladies first. No, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today, for the invitation, for joining us last night. Apologies for being late. I had to kick off our meeting this morning before I came running over here. So, but it is an absolute pleasure. I could not resist the opportunity to speak to such a distinguished audience, and of course, to be with such interesting experts when we're all talking right now about what the future of the CAP could and should look like. For those of you who aren't familiar with IATA, and I would not be surprised if you're not, because we're only 15 months old, but we've really shot out of the cannon. So we represent more than 70 regenerative farmers from 20 different European countries. We're growing all the time, all from very different contexts. So a mix of arable, mixed, livestock, market gardens, but we all subscribe to different schools of thought, different practices, so everything from holistic management to, sorry, we were up very late last night. So from holistic management to market gardening, extreme biodiversity. We have some who are organic. We have some who are conservation agriculture. Some who are small producers, some who are large. Some of our producers are 400, 800 hectares. Myself are 3.5. I was trying really hard not to be insulted by the idea that we could not be profitable under 5 hectares, especially with some of my colleagues are pulling in over 100,000 a year on 5,000 square meters of market gardens. I think there's a lot of opportunity to be discussing those kinds of different contexts and different opportunities within the vast range of production systems within Europe. Most of our members are landowners, not all, but most. Most of us are either first-generation farmers, or we are the ones coming back to the farm after our grandparents. For us, we are really trying to focus on how we could be introducing more resiliency into the agri-food ecosystem. I think we're all aware, seeing things like Valencia. I myself, we farm in the north of Spain together with my husband. We are in a privileged place between Pamplona and San Sebastián, where we have an average of 1,200 millimeters of rain per year. But north of us, only by half an hour, that can easily go up to 1,600, and go half an hour south of us and you get to just 600. And what we see is that constant shift of not just rain every year, but when it comes and how often it comes. Those extremes are shifting rapidly. We, for example, would have normally a 2-month non-growing season during the summer, which allows us to plant as well as harvest. But then, which we would have last year, the year before, we had a 2-week non-growing season, which makes it very complicated of when you are able to get into harvest, and then we're going to get into plant again for the fall. But then the year before, we had a 5-month non-growing season, which meant that the rain stopped in April. So how can you be planning your production, no matter what kind of system that you have, when you're facing that kind of environmental disturbance and change. So for us, from a regenerative agriculture perspective, what we're really looking for on one hand is understanding how to work on the different contexts. Every farm is its own mundo, as we say, but also understanding how we can be creating those communities of practice, those safe spaces where farmers can be learning from each other, understanding that if we're going to be creating resilience in these agri-food systems, that comes from being able to adapt quickly, but also learning what's best in our systems and working with nature rather than trying to dominate her. With that recognition that the environment is complex, that agri-food systems are complex, so how can we be creating those relationships from everything from soil health to plant and animal diversity, production diversity, the mixture of systems, so not having just single monocultures of any kind, whether it's a single species of livestock or a single crop, how we can be integrating those together to improve those systems, improve our ecological or ecosystem functions. How can we be also coming back to the idea of being remunerated for ecosystem services? How can we create systems where farmers are remunerated appropriately? I think we could see from Dr. Williams that the vast majority of farms are not viable businesses if you're only talking about 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 euros per year of income. I think we need to move away from the idea that people who have off-farm jobs do it because they want to. They do it because they have to. And so how can we be rebuilding these local community relationships between producers and consumers to ensure that the farmer livelihoods are resilient because they're getting paid not just for the food they're producing, but also for the ecosystem services that they're providing, for supporting rural development in their areas. And, you know, how can we be tackling all of these issues with a single policy? We find extremely challenging. So I encourage you all to check out our CAP reform proposal that we published in April of last year, looking at how to transition direct payments towards that regenerative transition that then pays based off of two satellite indicators of soil cover and MPP, which would be for photosynthesis, allowing us to really focus, again, the payments not necessarily on size, but focused on producing as much biomass as possible. And that biomass, therefore, allowing us to provide more food, fuel, and fiber, but also increasing soil health at the same time by increasing all of the carbon, not just sequestration, but also carbon cycling. And again, all of these pieces working together. So I would encourage you to check that out on our website, iarta.farm, and we can talk a bit more in detail on that, but I don't want to take up too much time from the rest of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Then I move to Rudolf.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here. That's a fantastic opportunity to exchange views about a subject that is absolutely fascinating, to put it that way. It feels, for me, it feels like a groundhog moment. After all, it comes back every 6-7 years. And the discussions, I mean, I went through that during my whole professional career, and the discussions resemble to each other. The problems are not entirely new, they haven't been solved, and they are then tackled again. What we have heard today, and thank you very much for both presentations, was a vision presented by Tassos, and I would say it's a real vision, which goes beyond what probably the Commission will come up with, with a system that would completely change and turn into a performance-based system at farm level. And I think that's what it would be at the end of the day, moving away from an annual payment system into a multi-annual system of rewarding farmers for improving their soils. And the other one by Alan Matthews was a much more down-to-earth vision, which is likely, I would say, to be much more reflected in what the Commission will come up with. And I was interested in hearing that he would basically say the system that we have is not that bad and could be, let's say, made fit for the future by tweaking it here and there and by making punctual or maybe more ambitious changes. Now, against my background, I'm a lawyer. I've been responsible for clearance of accounts in the European Commission, which might ring a bell to some of you, and responsible for legal questions in the first place. I would concentrate on a few topics that are close to my previous responsibilities. And the first topic is budget. I think that Professor Matthews is absolutely right that the budget has always been and will always be the major question that needs to be tackled and answered before agricultural policy can be debated. And when you look at the decision-making processes in previous reform exercises, you will always see that the real discussions, the real talking has started once the money was clear. So the first thing we would have to wait here is what will the Commission come up with in terms of money, of budget. And there are two issues. First, the size of the agricultural budget. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't really tell you anything more concrete about that. And the second issue is what kind of structure, budget structure, will we see in, let's say, mid-2025 appear when the Commission comes up with proposals. And there, Professor Matthews has mentioned that an idea has been floated to create kind of a single fund with sub-funds, which would basically leave much more flexibility to member states and, let's say, reduce the amount of detailed eligibility conditions as they are currently spelled out in the CAP, for example. Now, such a single fund as such is not a problem. The question is what the rules are that would govern the sub-funds in this single fund. And this is, I think, the crucial issue that has to be debated. For the time being, we don't have much of an information about that. But I think that's what we have to follow very attentively. Second question that I would like to comment on briefly is the question of the consistency of the consistency of the concept of direct payments in terms of the objectives that are being pursued. And I think there we have seen in the past that direct payments have been created in 1992, and Tassos mentioned that, with a relatively clear vision to compensate farmers for or partially compensate farmers for the losses they encountered in the framework of the McSherry reform in order to allow them to be competitive on the market and to take decisions on the basis of market opportunities. Now, this has completely changed. The logic as such could not be maintained forever. And in the meantime, a number of other aspects and another ambitions has been put or in addition to that. So today we can probably say that the income targeting is pretty blurred, and we have no clear idea who needs and deserves the support. And this is also something which was, I think, a core element of the strategic dialogue, which came up, I think, in my view, with a very right conclusion, very correct conclusion, to say that we need a better targeting. Of course, the question is, how should we obtain or how should we get to that better targeting? There, I must say, I'm very I'm very much sympathizing with what Professor Matthews has stated in his presentation. I think in all that, the elephant in the room, the second elephant in the room today, the elephant in the room is the question of competitiveness and structural adjustment. And this has been mentioned a couple of times. Direct payments to a certain extent have the effect of slowing down structural adjustment without really adding to the good functioning of the agricultural markets and the agricultural economy at European level. And so the question is, or I would share the conclusion by Professor Matthews that reducing payments for big farms should not necessarily lead to inflating payments to small and very small farms. The third aspect I would like to cover, and then I'm through, is that of simplification. Now, this is close to my heart because I was responsible for simplification for a couple of years in DG Agri, with a lot of activities that at the end of the day ended up in what we would call incremental or technical simplification of provisions, like how should controls be carried out, how should we implement certain application formalities, application procedures, and so on and so forth. I think this was not unsuccessful, but it was not really tangible for farmers. And it was not really, I think, the main interest of national administrations. And then, of course, each reform basically deletes what has been achieved in simplification before and adds new complexities due to political compromises that are inevitable. So I think that we should make it a clear distinction to have an honest and realistic debate between kind of technical simplification, this is what I just was referring to, and the political simplification, which does not mean that we simplify the life through deleting certain administrative requirements, but we drop or fundamentally change existing systems to take burden away from farmers and national administrations. And that's what we've seen in recent months. We've seen a number of changes that have been made to simplify, but in reality it was not simplification in the proper sense, but it was getting rid of unwanted or undesirable rules that had been introduced previously. And let's be honest in that debate and avoid using the word simplification for proposals and for changes that have a political background, and they have to be seen against the background of political desiderata. Three points that I would make to conclude. First, we need, of course, a better targeting, but we have to find out what it means. I very much think, like Professor Matthews, that degressivity or capping or an improved redistribution could do the job. Structural adjustment is very important, and we should keep in mind when we design the policy for the future and the future vision that structural adjustment can take place and can improve the competitiveness and the resilience of European agriculture. In terms of simplification, one petitum that I could make is that the more we separate income support from, for example, environmental requirements that should be tackled in different ways, the more we can simplify the system of direct payments. In the last reform, the introduction of eco schemes in the first pillar was probably inevitable because the two-pillar structure has been maintained. But we should seriously reflect whether, for the time after 2027, these payments should not be moved to the second pillar and to rural development, and leave the first pillar with a relatively well-defined income support structure, which would be much simpler than what we have today. So I think I leave it at that point, and the discussion will certainly be the right place to come back to one or two more points that have been mentioned.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. So I'm Theo Paquet, I'm from the EEB, European Environmental Bureau. So we represent the largest network of NGOs in Europe. So I have, let's say, 3 main points. So first off, thank you very much for the presentations. I think it's the perfect time to have these discussions. I wouldn't say it's a Groundhog Day, even if we've had those discussions many times. I think something's different today. We've had all the stakeholders around the table. With the strategic dialogue, that's never happened before. There was actually a consensus between organizations that have had very, very different points of view for the last 30, 40 odd years. So first, before I start, I want to echo your points on simplification. It should not be politically motivated simplification. It should be something that actually delivers on the ground for farmers and for member states. But for my 3 points, so the first one would be on redistribution of direct payments. So this was a clear point made in the strategic dialogue. The way it's set up today is not, well, fair. It's not functioning. We cannot have the status quo. The money needs to go to the ones that need it. How this is defined, we still need to discuss. This was clearly evidenced in Alan's presentation. But there's a clear need to move away from direct area-based payments. Also in Alan's presentation, you could see that, let's say, the top 7%, I think it was that you mentioned, they have no need for income support. The money would be much better spent on supporting them in their environmental transition. And that could be hectare-based as well, because they have much larger land, so any measure they put in place, any environmental measure they put in place would have much larger effects. So my second point would be on the fact that if you do liberate this money, hopefully assuming the cap budget stays what it is and doesn't decrease too much, as we all know it's unlikely that it will increase, this money should go in supporting farms in making the transition. Whether it's large farms or small farms, there's no small farm is good, large farms are bad. It's really very much a question of doing this transition and doing it now, because we've seen and we've heard today that farms are being affected by floods, they're being affected by forest fires. I mean, we're talking about competitiveness today, but if we don't address these environmental concerns today and in the next decades, I mean, farms are not going to be competitive. Regardless of how much money we put into them, they're not going to be competitive. And my last point is on indicators. Indicators are key. We've heard it from Megan. We've heard it from Tassos. I really like the mention on soil. And here I want to make a point is that you've mentioned, Tassos, that it should be looked at pluriannually. It should not be looked at yearly necessarily, because obviously soil takes a lot of time to regenerate. It takes a lot of time to improve. And here I want to make the link with eco schemes, which are yearly. And that's not necessarily the way it should be done, because a transition for a farm takes more than 1 year, obviously. It takes, especially farms that have been doing conventional farming for decades, it takes some time for the lands to recuperate. And I would also therefore call on those, let's say, environmental schemes to also look at the bigger picture and be longer, let's say, be pluriannual. And yeah, that would be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's say, first question I would like to come back. Alan, let's say within all of the figures, the one which is immediately becoming very visible is the fact that you said if you have a farm smaller than 5 hectares, forget it, close the door, look around who can take over. And indeed, if we link that to what was said within the strategic dialogue, that the money should go to those who need it the most. And while indeed there has never been a discussion on who are the ones who need it the most, let's say, I think that for quite a number of organizations in the room, they were looking towards the smaller farmers. So my question, but not only to you, but to all of the panelists is, yeah, those who need it the most. Well, the first question I have is, should it go to those who need it the most or to those who deserve it the most? And then whatever the answer is, who would that be? And I would say let's just go from this side of the table to the other side of the table with the panelists. I will come back at the end of the panel to our two hosts, but let's first do this with the panelists. Alan, I start with you.
Thanks, Sharon, and it gives me an opportunity to apologise to Megan. I think I did say when I was talking about the general non-viability of very small holdings that there were exceptions if people could engage in high-value enterprises. Clearly, market gardening would be an example of that. So I wasn't excluding the fact that these smaller farms will continue. And in arguing that the approach that might be, as I say, these are one's moving away from science now. This is just my own sort of personal view in terms of what might be done in the proposal in the coming year. Is that capping brings the number of holdings and releases a significant amount of money. We shouldn't exaggerate how much money it releases because, as I say, you are going to lose the hold that conditionality provides. So if you want, for example, to maintain buffer strips at 4 meters from waterways, you either need to do that through national regulations, or you need to, like the GAIAC regulation, you need to pay farmers to do that. So you may need to redirect some of that savings that you might save by lowering the ceiling on direct payments. You might need to redirect some of that to those very same farms to actually do what they're doing at the moment, depending, as I say, on how you would address it. But capping means, of course, that you're not going to remove the existing payments from smaller farms. So that would not be, I think, a sensible proposal to make at this time. So smaller farmers would continue to get support. We've seen that, potentially it does amount to, half of their income at the moment. So it is a significant contribution to their viability. But in terms of, you phrased the question very well, who needs it and who might deserve it? And in my own country, in Ireland, we have that debate because we have maintained and fought very hard to maintain the so-called historic basis for direct payments. Because, of course, that reflected the fact that the more intensive, if you like, more productive holdings had higher payments per hectare than more extensive, more marginal holdings. So it maintained, if you like, a skewed distribution. But in a sense, the argument that the main farmer organisation made was that these are the more productive holdings and they deserve it more. Of course, any link between payments and production is something that we've been trying to move away from. And for me, however we define it, I mean, I think Tassis's proposal to link payments to soil is interesting. I've asked him to try and concretize it a little bit more, because just exactly how it might work in practice, I think it's really interesting. Megan has also put forward some proposals as to how you would link the payments more to regenerative, to farming practices, and ideas of how you might measure that. But to me, that is the big challenge which we face in agriculture. So yes, keep the payments that exist. You might want to raise them in terms of maintaining their real value. But the idea that somehow you're going to slow down structural change if you dramatically increase those payments, I don't think it's desirable, and I don't think it would actually work in practice anyway. So in some way, we do need to use those payments. And again, just to make the point, because Tassos was arguing one of the strengths of direct payments is that they do provide certainty of income to farmers. But of course, if you have a longer-term contract to deliver environmental services, of course, that provides an income stream that farmers can rely on. So it's not that we are suggesting to do away with direct payments, absolutely not, but rather use them to focus on supporting farmers to make this transition to more sustainable, more resilient farming practices, which in the long run is probably going to support their income as well.
Okay, Tassos, same question for you. Money going towards those who deserve it or those who need it the most, and who are they?
Yeah, there is a split between. You take for granted that just because in the dialogue you had as stakeholders, you all agreed that it should go to those that need it. That means that the ones that need it are persons. If you had agreed, really, you would have defined who need it. My definition for what is needed is that it's European agriculture that is in need, and the people, the individuals that deserve it, is a separate discussion. First, you have to define what is needed for European agriculture. And what I thought we had agreed in all the analysis we had done before, but when you base dialogue with no analysis, institutional memory is gone, is that European agriculture has had major successes in terms of growth in output, in value, in exports, some in income, but was failing behind in terms of environmental delivery. And my starting point is what is needed is to focus on sustainable productivity growth, to make sure that we keep producing more, because I honestly believe that we need it, because the world needs it, and we are one of the most efficient agricultures globally. But this has to be done in a manner where the environmental outcome is much better than today. So if you define the needs based on what agriculture requires, and that's what the public policy is supposed to do, intervene on the focus of what you have about the agriculture, then those that deserve it should be the ones that should be able to demonstrate that they perform better than what has been the case so far. And that's why my focus has been on soil. I mean, it's easy to put many indicators and many aspects. I had asked colleagues some years ago, and even in IASA, one of the first things I asked is take 4 maps on the 4 words I insisted to put in the CAP reform monitoring system. Soil, water, air, and biodiversity. If you superimpose these maps, you should identify the areas that you have the biggest problems and where you need to focus more. Well, my feeling is, still gut feeling, because the analysis hasn't been finalized yet, but if you only focus on soil, pretty much you come up with the same. So that's one area of simplification. That doesn't mean that we don't follow what is happening with emissions, with water, with the farm bird index or other indicators of biodiversity, but it means that the conditionality that you require from the actors, the farmers, is linked to soil. So that's where the deserve comes. And the other part is that you, Alan, Rudy, you have been discussing about the income and the environment as splitting. Now, if you split the income and the environment in the approach, I can see very clearly the argument that Rudy made, because we know how proposals are made. You can simplify in terms of the legislative proposal and probably in the outcome. The real question I'm asking is, but what happens on the farmer? Because the economic and the environmental action of the farmer is not split, and the legislations cannot be split. So that's why, in my view, those that should deserve it are those that should be able to demonstrate that the real performance that they have is based on what our biggest need is, to have productivity growing in a sustainable way. And that's why I focus on one area, because if we try to focus on everything under the sun, it becomes much more complex to implement.
Okay, Megan. Money for those who need it the most, or for those who deserve it the most?
Oh.
Who are they?
I think we can no longer, as a society, afford to be separating environment from food production. Just as we cannot see humans as outside of the ecosystem and outside of nature, we are inherently part of it, just as food production is inherently part of nature. Therefore, for those who have, through systems or through policy or through culture, history, whatever, separated those two between food production and the environment to help bring them back. For us, that's who really needs that support. It's that transition finance, and we believe that the CAP payment should be part of that. Not the only financial mechanism to support the transition. Also, looking at insurance and smart deals with off-takers and a number of other areas. But we feel that those direct payments should be the safety net that will allow that transition at scale to happen. We know that the transition has a perceived risk of drop off in productivity. We also know that when producers have the knowledge, the support, the advisory, the tech, in order to do the transition, that they can do that without significant losses, and usually with higher profits to begin with. That is one of the key pieces of regenerative agriculture, is when we are looking at how to work with the complexity of nature, that we can be reducing the cost of inputs and we can be reducing the cost of production while increasing significantly the profits. So it's an entirely economic strength process. But in order to do that, we need to have that support for the first few years to make sure that we can reduce those perceived risks, we can reduce that fear in that shift. Do small producers need support? That would be great. I have never received a dime. I would never expect to. In my land, which is considered degraded land, we would get about 400 euros per year of CAP payments. My degraded land has between 4.5% and 5.5% of soil organic carbon. Tell me who of the big producers in Europe who have high productivity land have that kind of soil organic carbon to begin with. So I think we really need to be looking at, when it comes to need, it's like, well, what are we trying to achieve? And I think that comes back to what Tassos was talking about. We're trying to achieve food security. I think we need to be talking about food sovereignty as well. That's a word that hasn't come up. We're looking for environmental and social and economic resiliency. We're looking at resiliency against climate change. We want to all be here producing as farmers for our generation and all of the generations to come, but we're not going to be able to do that if we don't take the steps needed now to shift the way that we produce food and the way that we interact with our consumers and with the food supply chain in general. So who needs it? All of us, for a while. I teach farmers. That's part of what I do for a living, is teach farmers regenerative agriculture with holistic financial planning. What we do is we teach them to plan for profit. You plan your system so that you are profitable first. That is then what's going to allow you to decide what costs you can have, where to focus your investments. If you've got economic activities that are not profitable, they go. Don't keep throwing money down at a hole. So how can we be shifting the way that we're producing food? How can we be having these food production systems that are place-based and context-based, where we can be making the most of what that land is meant to be producing and not trying to force it under a yoke to produce something that because some subsidy scheme or because some system or some buyer told me that I need to do it. So how can we be helping the farmers to do this It's going to be with money, it's going to be with transitioning cap payments, but it's also going to be with peer-to-peer learning, it's also going to be with knowledge exchange, and it's also going to be finding different financial mechanisms to make that happen. So, thank you.
Rudolf.
Yeah, let's try to pin it down for a second. If the objective is basically to reduce the payment of those who don't need them to be viable producers, big ones, for example, or relatively big ones, that's what Alan Matthews has demonstrated, then we will end up with a certain amount of money that needs to be distributed. And then the question is, who deserves to get these funds? I think Tassos has made the point quite validly that environment is one of the major priorities that we have to follow. Then the question is, should this be done by in the way of direct payments, or should we do it rather in the way as agri-environmental and agri-climate payments are currently made in the second pillar in a multi-annual way, and maybe even with a performance element in the sense that they are not paid for doing certain things, but for reaching certain objectives, for example, improving their soil after a certain period of time. Another issue that I crossed my mind was, for example, what happens to alpine regions where you currently have a certain type of agriculture that once it disappears, it will be gone. And it will not be replaced by other farms because the production conditions are not really made for bigger scale farming. One issue that could be contemplated. What about doing with farmers that should be moved out or should move out of production because what they are doing is simply contaminating the groundwater with nitrates? Situation we have very clearly these days in the Netherlands, for example. Is there a need for a dropout premium for a certain period of time to ease this kind of cleaning up of the situation? Do young farmers need direct payments? The big question: is it a good idea to lure young people into farming because they get for a couple of years monthly or yearly income injections, or should they rather be helped in the field of knowledge management, of investments? Should they get a certain capital to start their enterprise, but then know that after a few years they have to stand on their own feet without being supported? It's another issue. So I think there is a lot to be discussed in that area. And still, I would think that a number of these things, in particular when it comes to environment and climate, should be done outside of the field of direct payments in the proper sense, because there we don't talk about income in the first place, but we talk about reaching certain environmental objectives that are currently not produced.
And Theo, same question.
I think I'm going to do like everyone and say both. Basically, yeah, obviously some people are going to need it, especially in a transition situation, and also to get settled in. So young farmers being one of those groups, obviously. And as you've mentioned, mountainous areas, there's a couple of, let's say, farming sectors that do not have an opportunity to, let's say, be profitable in the common sense. However, when it comes to the ones who deserve it, 100% agree that this should definitely be the way forward, especially if it's result-based. Because even today, a lot of legislation that's in place, not GAICs, not within the cap, but actual legislation on water, on birds and habitats directive, it's not applied at member state level. So having those results-based indicators would make sure that those people that are actually claiming they're doing something are actually doing something in practice. And for this, yes, they could be rewarded.
Okay, I'm coming back to I would say to Theo and Megan. What we heard from Tassos is he's putting forward soil as a basic element for those direct payments. Soil, indeed, if it's in a good quality, it's resulting in productivity and it's resulting in profitability. But at the same time, a soil in good health is contributing to carbon in the land, so to a number of aspects of climate change, and it's actually contributing to biodiversity. So I would like to hear your specific views on soil as a basis for direct payments.
Thank you. So without slipping into teacher mode, soil without plants is inert. It's basically rock, right? Decomposed rock. So you need both the plants for the photosynthesis together with the soil so that it's feeding the microbiology. This is how it's all working together, right? So to have healthy soils, and that's again why with our CAP proposal we are focusing on measuring photosynthesis, more carbon cycling, more water infiltration, more water retention, more resiliency in drought, longer production periods. All of these things work together, and ground cover, because that keeps the water where it needs to be. It reduces or eliminates evaporation. We want to make sure that all water cycles through plants, right? And so I think we need to just, yes, soil health, absolutely, but understanding how that soil gets healthy. Understanding the nutrient cycling and how to, be reducing and in some cases eliminating mineral fertilizers. How can we be getting the soil active again so that it is making those natural connections with the nutrients in the soil and building up the bacteria as well as the fungi? We need all of this. So measuring soil health is still very challenging and still very expensive. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done. It must absolutely be done. But it's also why we're trying to find indicators that are much cheaper, where the technology actually exists, where we can be doing it at its scale, and it is something where we're taking advantage of our great European technology with our global mapping and Copernicus satellites. I think it's important that we take a more holistic view on soil and understand, again, with our two indicators, we are able to insinuate the correlations between water cycle, mineral cycle, photosynthesis, and biodiversity. And in fact, at the moment, we're starting to release our first results from our pilot project looking at more than 100 farms across Europe of measuring those kinds of factors to demonstrate, on one hand, how those satellite data could work, but also demonstrating how with reduced or less or no inputs, we're able to increase productivity and increase farm profitability as well. So last night, as part of our dinner here at the Parliament, was when we released those first results from Finland, Greece, and Germany. We'll be publishing those results more formally over the next several months, demonstrating how those two pieces could go together. But absolutely, soil health is the goal, but not necessarily something easily measured or cheaply or at scale.
So not much to add on the soil. I think you've covered it pretty much. Just want to raise one point is that, yes, soil is a good indicator for some types of farming. But if you have some, let's say, more intensive animal husbandry farms, it's not necessarily the best indicator. You have to look at water pollution, for example. So it is a great, for integrated farms, for arable crops, etc. It's a great indicator. But let's not forget that we have very diverse farms, and some of them it might not be the best one. So it could be a great indicator overall, but not necessarily the only one.
I'm eating literally part of your lunch. Let's say I'm going to skip questions from the audience. Let's say if you really have specific questions, people are still here. You can come forward and still have a discussion. I would like to ask Paolo and Stoyan in a single minute. I know that's impossible for a politician, but within a single minute, Paolo, what are you taking out of this meeting to the Agri Committee?
Thank you a lot. I learned a lot, of course, with some very good presentations from our predecessor speakers. Tasso is presented a quite disruptive, I will say, model, and but I would, as I only have 1 minute, and I want to create the same impact that Tasso made. We are at the European Union level failing in an environment. Comparing to who? This is my main question. Our standards. Okay, but the question is that when we compare to US, we are talking about competitiveness. And when you talk the Draghi report, and fortunately I saw some criticism on the Draghi report, thank you for that, because I have the same idea. We talk about competitiveness and comparisons between European Union, China, US. And when we talk about environmental standards, we are on the top of the global rankings, exactly. Rankings. So when we focused, we cannot fight production, economic activity with environmental protection. This is wrong. I totally agree. We should continue to promote the sustainable production of agriculture. It's a sustainable production of food. But at the same time, we cannot forget that we are the most advanced in the world protecting our environment. And at the end, the statistics says that, of course, the statistics could be wrong and lie, say that we are responsible for 7 to 8% of the total global emissions in the European Union. So when we talk about competitiveness and we compare with other continents, when we talk about the environment, we need to, of course, to compare to other continents. And in this sense, we are the most advanced. So good ideas, I will take a lot of good ideas, I will study even more with presentations, see the point of view of several parts, and you can count on the Parliament, on EPP, I'm here from the EPP, of course, to respect all the ideas, but at the same time to create this sense for the farmers to not have the need to bring the tractors again to Brussels and to complain and to fight for this. Thanks a lot.
Stoyan, what do you take with you to the European Economic and Social Committee?
Well, I like the saying that we don't own the land. Actually, we borrow from the next generation. And that's why I really like what Tasso said, because basically, see here, Greece, Portugal, Bulgaria, Spain, we are all suffering right now. So we have this sort of different approach in our regards, because what is happening in South, it didn't come yet on the northern part, but it's going to come. But then it's going to be too late for the South. So it's going to be game over for the South. So that's why I think, yes, we need to repurpose and we need to start with a different approach, and that's something that we've been discussing a lot here. I like that Tassos put it, let's say, on the paper, and how how we can avoid the moment when my son is going to turn back and is going to say, "Dad, what the heck you did with our land?" I don't want this to happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Looking at what I've heard this morning from the perspective of the European Landowners Organization, we are an organization representing a combination of, within our membership we have 80% of them are having farming activities, 60% are having forestry activities, and even 40% are dedicating part of the land specifically to biodiversity, to nature conservation. If we speak about our members, we are not speaking about farmers. We prefer to speak about land managers. That's quite often because they have the possibility to shift between elements of farming, forestry, and nature conservation. But if I'm presenting the organization, one of the main questions I'm getting almost systematically is, but what is the difference between the European Landowners Organization, for instance, and other farming organizations in Brussels? Then I always say, well, it's the land ownership. If we are speaking about farming activities, we have farmers, landowners, and for them their land is capital. It's something you get from the former generation, you bring it back to the next generation, and what you absolutely want to do is to do that, making sure that the land is keeping the same quality and even, if possible, increasing the quality of the land, because that is related to your capital. If you're a farmer and you're not owning the land, the land is becoming a commodity. It's something which you would like to make a profit, and I don't blame them. Let that be clear. But that makes that often we have a different view on how to proceed. And I have to say, I was glad with what I've heard from Tassos when he's putting forward soil as a basis for direct payments, because I think that is fitting extremely well with the idea that land, and so automatically soil is capital. And as soil is indeed related as well to productivity, if we look at it from an economic point of view, because we have to be honest, for a private landowner, not being able to make a profit would mean that you're losing your land on the longer term. So that's something we don't want. But at the same time, being able to link soil with environmental aspects and to link soil with climate aspects, I think is for us a very nice way forward. I hope that what we have heard this morning has been useful to all of you. It's broader than just the soil aspect. We wanted to give, let's say, a basic view on the need to work on direct payments, and there are a number of possibilities. We have heard a number of possibilities. So I hope you can take that with you, and that, let's say, that we see in the... I'm very sorry. Yeah. Well, and I truly hope that all together we can move forward with those direct payments. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for my panelists. And